She gave water to a wounded Navajo. The next day, his warriors surrounded her home. Elena Rodriguez wiped the sweat from her brow as she hung the last of the laundry on the line behind her small adobe house. The New Mexico sun beat down mercilessly on the high desert, and she could feel the familiar ache in her shoulders from another long day of work. At 62, she had been living alone in this remote valley for 15 years, ever since her husband Miguel passed away. Their children had moved to the cities, begging her to come with them. But Elena couldn't bring herself to leave the land that held so many memories. The nearest town was 40 miles away, accessible only by a rough dirt road that wound through the mesas and arroyos. Most people thought Elena was foolish to live so isolated, especially an aging woman alone, but she had always found peace in the solitude. She tended her small vegetable garden, raised a few chickens, and made beautiful pottery that she sold at the trading post in town once a month. It was a simple life, but it was hers. As evening approached, Elena was drawing water from her well when she heard something that made her freeze. A low moan carried on the wind, barely audible over the rustling of the cottonwood trees. She set down her bucket and listened carefully. There it was again, definitely human, and filled with pain. Following the sound, Elena walked toward the rocky outcropping that bordered her property. What she found there made her gasp. A young Navajo man lay crumpled among the boulders, his face pale beneath his bronze skin, blood seeping through his torn shirt. His breathing was shallow and labored, and it was clear he had been there for some time. Elena knew the tensions that existed between some of the local communities. There had been conflicts over water rights and grazing land, misunderstandings that sometimes erupted into confrontations. But looking at this wounded young man, she saw only someone in desperate need of help. Elena, she said softly in the few Navajo words she knew, hoping to identify herself as she knelt beside him. The man's eyes fluttered open, dark and filled with fever, but also with fear. He tried to move away from her, perhaps expecting hostility or worse. "Easy," Elena whispered, switching to Spanish and then broken English. "I want to help you. Water. You need water." She hurried back to her house and returned with a cup of cool water, a clean cloth, and her basic medical supplies. Elena had learned to treat injuries over the years, living so far from doctors. She had set Miguel's broken arm once, stitched up her own hand after a fall, delivered a calf when the veterinarian couldn't make it through a storm. The young man was burning with fever, and Elena could see that he had been shot, the bullet wound in his side infected and angry-looking. As she carefully cleaned the wound, he drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes murmuring in Navajo, sometimes crying out in pain. Elena worked through the night, cooling his fever with wet cloths, cleaning and bandaging his wound, giving him small sips of water and eventually thin broth. She didn't know his name or how he had come to be injured, but none of that mattered. Her late husband had always said that the desert taught you what was truly important. And right now, the only important thing was preserving this young man's life. By morning, the fever had broken, and the wounded man was able to stay awake for longer periods. Elena had moved him to Miguel's old workshop, where he would be more comfortable and hidden from view. She wasn't sure who might be looking for him or why, but something in his eyes told her he was running from danger. "Thank you," he whispered in accented English as Elena brought him breakfast. "You saved my life. What is your name?" Elena asked gently. "Joseph," he replied. "Joseph Begay. I am from the reservation to the north." He paused, studying her weathered but kind face. "Why did you help me?" "You don't know me. You don't know what I might have done." Elena sat down in the old wooden chair beside the cot. "My husband used to say that in the desert, we are all just travelers seeking water. When you find someone dying of thirst, you don't ask where they came from or where they're going. You give them water." Joseph's eyes filled with tears. "There was a misunderstanding, a dispute over cattle that wandered onto reservation land. Angry words were spoken, and then someone fired a shot. I was trying to leave when—" He gestured to his wounded side. "I've been walking for 2 days, trying to get home to my family." Elena nodded. She had heard about such conflicts, how quickly they could escalate when fear and misunderstanding took hold. "You need to rest and heal before you travel again. The infection could have killed you." Joseph stayed hidden in the workshop for 3 more days as his strength returned. Elena brought him meals, fresh bandages, and quiet conversation. He told her about his wife and 2 young children, about his work as a teacher at the reservation school, about his dreams of helping bridge the divide between communities. Elena shared stories of her life with Miguel, their children, the love she had for this harsh but beautiful land they had chosen to call home. On the fourth morning, Elena woke to an unusual sound. Horses, many horses approaching her property. She looked out her window and felt her blood run cold. At least 20 Navajo warriors on horseback had surrounded her house, their faces stern, weapons visible. At their head rode an older man with silver hair and eyes like flint. Elena's hands shook as she stepped outside, but she held her head high. If these men meant to harm her for helping Joseph, she would face them with dignity. The silver-haired leader dismounted and walked toward her, his expression unreadable. "I am Thomas Begay," he said in English, his voice deep and commanding. "I am looking for my son." Elena's mind raced. Begay, Joseph Begay. This was Joseph's father, and he had brought what appeared to be a war party to her door. "I don't know what you mean," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. Thomas studied her for a long moment. "My son was shot 4 days ago during a dispute. He disappeared into the desert, wounded and alone. We have been tracking him. The trail leads here." Before Elena could respond, Joseph emerged from the workshop, moving slowly, but under his own power. "Father," he called out. "Stop. This woman saved my life." The tension in the air was palpable as father and son looked at each other across the dusty yard. Thomas's warriors remained mounted but alert, waiting for his signal. Elena stood between them all, a small figure in a faded dress, but somehow unafraid. "She found me dying," Joseph continued, walking carefully toward his father. "She stayed awake all night, fighting the fever that would have killed me. She asked no questions, wanted no payment. She gave me water when I was dying of thirst, food when I was weak, shelter when I had nowhere to go." Thomas looked from his son to Elena, his stern expression beginning to soften. "You did this knowing he was Navajo? Knowing there has been trouble between our peoples?" Elena lifted her chin. "I did this knowing he was human and in pain. Nothing else mattered." For a long moment, the only sounds were the wind through the cottonwoods and the stamping of horses. Then Thomas Begay dismounted completely and walked to Elena. To her amazement, he took her hands in his weathered ones. "You have given me back my son," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You have shown kindness when you could have shown fear or hatred. How can we repay such a gift?" Elena shook her head. "No payment is needed. I only did what any decent person would do." Thomas smiled then, the first time his face had shown warmth since his arrival. "My grandmother always said that the true measure of a person is revealed not in their words, but in their actions when no one is watching. You have shown us who you are." What happened next became a story told around fires for generations. Thomas Begay and his men spent the rest of the day at Elena's small homestead, not as conquerors or threats, but as grateful guests. They repaired her roof, fixed her well pump, and restocked her woodpile. Joseph's wife and children were sent for, and they arrived that evening with tears of joy and gratitude for the woman who had saved their husband and father. But the greatest gift came later. Thomas arranged for Elena to receive a small but steady income from the reservation for teaching pottery making to Navajo children, sharing techniques her grandmother had taught her generations before. The isolation that had once worried her family became a bridge between communities, as Elena's home became a place where understanding could grow. Years later, when Elena finally passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 78, her funeral was attended by people from 3 different communities. Joseph Begay, now a tribal leader, spoke at her service about the woman who had shown them all that. Kindness knows no boundaries. Elena's simple act of giving water to a dying man had created ripples that spread far beyond her small adobe house in the desert. She had proven that in a world often divided by fear and misunderstanding, a single act of compassion could build bridges that would last for generations. The warriors who had surrounded her home that morning had come expecting to find an enemy, but instead they found a reminder of the humanity that connects us all, as essential and life-giving as water in the desert.